It's time. It's time. It's time once again for the tabletop role-playing game community's #1 game show. We haven't done this one in a bit. It's Wheel of Irrelevance. Backstory. What is it? What is it? It's backstory. Yes, this is a thing again. It's been a thing again, and now it became a thing again. It's like I'm walking out the door, and the door's almost closed, and then somebody brings it up again. Backstory, and like whole huge interweb documentaries on the backstory. And yes, I need to have a backstory, and no, I don't need to have a backstory, and fitting the backstory into your story, and not fitting the backstory into blah 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 blah. How long should the backstory be? Should I incorporate things that we've done this, guys. We've done this, right? We've had the discussion on backstory. But okay. So Gygax himself said he wasn't really interested in the backstory. He's interested in the front story, the story going forward, So there's Gygax. Then we go through, the school of filmmaking, and the basis of any script is, if you haven't caught my attention, we call this the elevator pitch, right? If you can't sell me your movie in 2 minutes, if you can't sell me your movie in the time it takes us to take this elevator trip, then I'm probably not interested in your movie. And that's been categorically proven that, the first 10 pages of a script, if that doesn't grab the audience, then you're probably not going to get them. You need, and again, that goes to backstory. And then we look at like the top stories, the top most popular characters in fiction, and what their backstories are. And you look at almost everyone, and they're characters whose backstories are 2-3 lines. Who's number one? Who's the number one character pretty much in pop fiction? Batman, right? Batman. What's Batman's backstory? Saw his parents get killed when he was 9. That's it. Everything else we know about Batman, we're told going forward. That very first episode, we know Batman's backstory. Same with Spider-Man, bitten by a radioactive spider. Then saw his uncle get killed. Everything else is forward story. Superman, strange visitor from another planet with powers and abilities beyond those from mortal man. That's all we need to know. And speaking of backstory, I'm watching Altered Carbon right now again for the 3rd time on Netflix, because it's just such an amazing experiment in world building. And again, what is the backstory you know about the character when you first meet him? That he was some kind of super soldier. And he was in a fight. Everything else about the main character is told through each episode. Everything else about the world is told between episode. Your backstory isn't that important. If it's not interesting, and if it takes longer than 2 minutes for you to tell me your backstory, I've probably lost interest. But please, here's where I say, but please go ahead, write it down. Write down that backstory. Make it, a fucking novel. And I hope to God you take that backstory novel and publish it. And maybe you become the next Dragonlance, the next Confessions of a D-list superhero, the next Stormlight Archives. The best, the Wildcard series is all based upon characters that were in a role-playing game. Take that backstory and do something with it. And if it's important for me to read it, email it to me. I'll read it on my off time, but don't make it the center of your character's focus, and don't make it the center of the campaign. And then don't bring things into the backstory that you're going to get upset about if the DM says, no. That's why we had session 0. Now, I said I'm running an all human and elf campaign. You brought in a dwarf. Well, my backstory, dude, I said no dwarves. Well, my backstory, So the backstory thing is an argument, and I think, we just have to go back to that. The two sides. Yes, it needs to give you need that kernel of motivation, but that kernel of motivation should never be longer than a couple lines. It should never be more than the 2 minutes it takes us to take this elevator. Everything I need to know about your character, you should be able to tell me in a minute, 2 minutes. Everything else I'll learn as we go along the way, right? Luke Skywalker. I grew up on Tatooine. My dad died in a war. Da-da-da-da. Going for it. All right, let's spin the wheel again because we got a couple. The next one is Oh, dice fudging. Dice fudging is a thing again. Dice fudge. I need to fudge the dice to tell my story. I need to fudge the dice to tell my story. Oh no, in this scene, no one was supposed to die because I really need them to see what's in the next scene, so I'll just fudge the dice. So mostly this is directed at the GMs, because if like a player gets caught fudging the dice, you're cheating. Right? Dude, that was a 7. I knew a guy who did this. And then I knew another guy who did this using the dice tower. So this guy had a dice tower, and he would use the dice tower to cheat because he never saw what he rolled until he lifted the dice tower, right? So you never knew what it was. He would just say which number, and then if you called him on it, he would reach down and flip it and lift the dice tower. And 9 out of 10 times, 8 out of 10 times, he'd get it. We caught him cheating really quick. And there was another guy, and we knew he was cheating for years, but the DM didn't seem to care. So it was like he never rolled under a 17. He would roll the dice, and then he would pick it up and look at it and tell us the number and then put it down. And everybody knew he was cheating. But the DM didn't do anything, And if I've caught people cheating, I've been like, you want to roll that again there? But this is regarding to the DM cheating to move the story forward. Whether he doesn't want something to happen, like, oh no, because it moves us. I need to tell my story. In order to tell my story, I need to fudge the dice or my story never happens. Or the other end is like, I really need this guy to go down. I motherfucking hate this character. I want him to die in this scene, so I'm going to fudge the dice. And it's like, okay, is that good or is that bad? Do we do it? Do we not do it? I mean, and what about the rule of cool? Do we like give him a little extra bonus because of the rule of cool? And my argument has always been, dude, you're the DM. Anything you want to happen will happen. They don't know what's going on behind the screen. You don't need to even roll dice if you don't want to. I mean, yeah, if you have set it in your mind that you can't tell the story unless X happens, well, that's kind of you're handicapping yourself because you're not giving yourself the permission to explore the options of, well, maybe it isn't happening the way I want it to happen, but maybe I can run with this. So let's go. The story, the example I saw, Crafty Matt put up about how the guy was telling his novel, and everything had to happen in a certain way for his story to move forward. And we know another guy who's very guilty of this, with his hour-long games, where basically it's scripted and the players really have no choice. So if the player doesn't succeed, he's going to script the dice. So he does, because he needs his story to be told. But what happens, if you just let that go? What happens if you just say, I need my story to happen, but it doesn't necessarily need to happen in the way I have it written, right? The MacGuffin just needs to get there. We talk about the MacGuffin a lot when we're talking about story developing, and the railroad versus the non-railroad and the ghost train, and is it a railroad if they don't know they're on the railroad, right? So let's say you just let the dice lie. Your story says they have to go from X to Y because of the MacGuffin. But between X and Y, something happens and they can't make it to Y because the dice didn't play the way you thought the story should play. Railroading, and the guy that who with his hour-long campaigns, and the guy who has to run his novel would say, no, it has to happen. So even though you made it. But hello, Dice Tales. Hello, Nerdy Ogre. I would say, okay, let's run with it. Let's run with the mistake. Let's run with the failure. Let's see where this goes, because the thing, whatever it is, can still happen. We can just replace the packaging the thing is in and move it. You guys always hear me talk about, well, just move it. They don't know. Even if they've read the module, you can change it. So they don't know. And that ability of them not knowing gives you the freedom to just move shit around in the ghost train. Okay, well, they were supposed to go through from A to B. Dice rolls said they didn't go from A's to B's. I'm not going to fudge it. So now they are stuck somewhere between A and B. They're now never going to make it to B because the dice roll said so. How do I adapt the story to run with what happened? Because maybe this is as interesting, if not more interesting, than what would have happened had I just used the railroad. The ghost train eventually gets where it needs to go. And if it's a roundabout way, so what? I mean, the longest campaign I ever ran, 9 years, my Freeport campaign, was mostly just simply because failed dice rolls and them going off in directions I didn't plan on and then running with it instead of forcing them. And the worst games I've ever seen, the every table flip game I've ever seen, is when the DM had to have his story go a certain way and it didn't. In fact, time after time after time, we see that the more you try and force players in the box, the more likely the players are going to fight against you, because their natural inclination as a human being is to go, you don't tell me what to do. Stop trying to push me in there. Why are you trying to push me in there? I don't want to go in there. And the more you push them down the railroad, the more likely they're going to fall off the railroad. So you don't need to fudge dice, because you should just let whatever happens and run with it. But if you have to fudge dice, if you're just, I've got to, well, then dude, you're the DM, okay? And nobody knows what's going on behind the screen until you tell them. You don't even have to fucking roll, really, if you don't want to. You could just say, dice tails, you take 40 points of damage. Why? Because the ogre hit you. I didn't see you roll. I don't have to roll. I'm the DM. I mean, it's stupid. Yes. The illusion of agency with real agency. Let the players tell the story. If the players are invested, they will tell you things about the story you sometimes didn't even know because of the way they interpreted facts. What you say and what they hear are often two different things, and they will sometimes go in interesting directions with the story, and you could either be nope or you could run with it. I've run this one thing several times for several different groups. And almost every time I run this murder mystery, they resolve it in a completely different way. It never resolved the murder mystery the same way twice, the 3 or 4 times I've run it. But they always inevitably get up to the something resembling the conclusion without me really having to railroad them. They just sort of, whether if they kill the wrong guy or go the wrong direction, they inevitably just bumble their way, because sooner or later, the ghost train always gets to the station. It might have just taken a really weird way to get there, but you don't have to fudge the dice. You don't have to force them. You don't have to railroad them, because, it's going to end up eventually in some variation of what you needed the MacGuffin to be. And the MacGuffin just can, change what it looks like. The wrapping around the MacGuffin can be a thermal detonator. It can be a shoe. It can be a Maltese Falcon. It doesn't matter, because the Maltese Falcon isn't about the Maltese Falcon. It's about the adventure they had getting to the Maltese Falcon, right? All right, so the third one is inclusion, because that's another thing. And that feels like that's the topic of a whole separate video, because the inclusion versus gatekeeping, the toxic left versus the toxic right, and those few of us who are stuck in the center. And this is coming out of the whole Gygax thing and the legacy of Gygax thing and the 50th anniversary thing and the stupid mention of inclusion in the little thing and how they're erasing Gygax from the history. And it's important because it seems to be a very toxic sticking point for a lot of people right now, to talk about the inclusion things, and I felt included, or I don't feel included, or the misinformation that, well, you weren't included until, like the guy said, well, it's always just been white guys until 2014. So it's inclusion versus gatekeeping, toxic left versus toxic right, and who do I allow at my table? The trouble with the argument is, if I would not be allowed at some of the tables that I was allowed at based upon a lot of these misinformations from both sides, right? I mean, Gatekeeping is good. I wouldn't allow X. Well, what if I'm X? That means I wouldn't be allowed at your game, and if inclusion didn't exist until 2014, then all the tables I was at, I wasn't at, or I should never have been at because I should never have been included. I mean, it's inclusion versus gatekeeping. Inclusion says everybody's welcome. We want people to play the game. If you don't like the way we're playing it, let us help you find another table. And gatekeeping says, well, I'd only want certain people playing my game and only a certain way. And if you've got blue hair, I don't want you at my game. Well, what if that blue-haired person is a really awesome gamer? Well, I've always allowed anybody I wanted to play with my game. But you just said, so yeah, the inclusion versus gatekeeping thing is a weird one. And I don't know if I'm qualified to discuss it because I have such a personal, emotional stake in it. There's definitely been some things said on both sides that really upset me about this. And the whole Gygax thing and erasing the past thing is not only insulting and ludicrous, it's just dumb. It's just dumb. And the way they're doing it, I mean, fine, history gets rewritten. You discover a new fact and suddenly what you think happened on this day in this war didn't actually happen that way. Oh, it looks like somebody conquered this nation before Alexander the Great conquered it. We just found some new facts. History constantly being rewritten. But just erasing stuff, the way they're doing it is just dumb. It's like they don't think anybody's going to notice that they erased the stuff and they're rewriting the history. And they're saying the things like, well, it wasn't very inclusive, was it? It's like, where's that coming from? Did you think we wouldn't notice? It's like saying, hey, that statue to George Washington, because tomorrow's George Washington's birthday, that's been on the lawn of the town, hall for 200 years. And you wake up one morning and the statue to George Washington that's been on the lawn for the town hall for 200 years is gone. And you walk over to the town hall and you just casually go, hey, what happened to the statue of George Washington? Is it repairs or something? And the town hall's response is, what statue? And you're like, the statue that George Washington. What statue of George Washington? The statue of George Washington that was on the lawn for the past 200 years. Okay. But what about this postcard? What postcard? The postcard of the town hall with the statue. That's you in the post. Never happened. That's literally what they did. That's literally what they're trying to do. Look, if they're an asshole and they don't fit with your game, fine. But, if you're going to say you're inclusive, but then also say, I don't allow X at my game. Oh, well, LGBTQT people can't be allowed at my table. Well, then I can't be allowed at your table. I'm LGBTQT. How is that inclusive? The only thing that should be is everybody's welcome at the table. If they want to play, if they want to learn, if they don't like the way we play, I will help you find a different game. If you're an asshole and you can't get along with the people at my table, I will ask you to leave, but I will help you to find another game where you will fit in. Anything else just seems to be counterintuitive to the philosophies that both sides seem to want to project. And then we get to this point where people are just like, well, I don't know what the fuck to do. I guess I'll just start my own group, which I guess is just my desperate way of saying, I want to play. So there we go. We spun the wheel. We've looked at the 3 pointless stories that are moving the tabletop role-playing game community forward. Backstories is still a thing. I don't know why. Dice fudging is still a thing. I don't know why. And this inclusion thing, I have a feeling, is going to be the major or one of the 3 biggies this year. And I just want to remind everybody that every time we get on these roller coasters, into whatever, it's another chance for Wizards of the Coast to distract us, right? So this whole erasing Gygax thing, we're an inclusion thing, we're burning buildings, we're pitchforks and torches, right? But during all this, nobody has paid attention to the number of companies that are signing the new CC for 6th edition. Because this morning, I just listed off 4 new ones. Did anybody notice that when I was going through the list of new products and new companies that were coming stuff up? Those are all people that have agreed to the new CC for 6E. You know, all these little mom and pop companies that are like, the only way I can go forward is if I agree to this new draconian CC, which nobody has seen yet, but we know it's out there. So every time we're arguing over inclusion or backstory or dice fudging or whatever else, it's Wizards of the Coast is fanning those flames. Yes, give into the hate, argue with each other. And then while they're doing that, it's another small little chunk of the 5e community, the gaming community, that's going, fine, I will sign your devil's contract because it's the only way I'm going to get my stuff out there. And yes, you should keep the real world out of your games. I have no trouble with you, whatever you are. Just understand during that 3 hours, if you know, I don't want real world politics. I don't want to hear about your representation. You know, just play your character, enjoy the game. And at the end of the 3 hours, after we take a break, if you want to talk about whatever, sure, we can get up and go get a coffee and talk about whatever. But the game is the game, and the game should be sacred to the game. And the only thing that should happen to the game is the game. And if you want to share your 300-page backstory with me, email it to me. And if I think it's good, I'll recommend a publisher, because who knows, your 300-page backstory could become the next Brandon Sanderson mega novel. You know, so if you really need to write that backstory, guys, most DMs are probably not qualified to tell you how good it is anyway. So just give them the 2-minute elevator pitch and then write it down. Send it to them. And if it's good enough, maybe send it to a publisher. You don't know. Right? I mean, Game of Thrones, that came out of nowhere. That was probably some game Martin wrote. We know the Wild Card series was based upon some game they played. So yeah, but I don't want to hear it. It's longer than 2 minutes. I don't want to hear it. Email it to me. That's it. So we've spun the wheel, and the winner of the prize is of the 2 people who have commented. It's Dice Tales. Congratulations, Dice Tales. You win a year's supply of turtle wax and a turtle. Here you go. It's in the mail. Talk to y'all later. Have a great day.